Hi, my name is Michael Santos, and I'm with Prison Professors and super enthusiastic to be presenting this first video, which is an interview that I did with Weldon Long. Now, you've probably already watched the overview video that talks really about the entire course, preparing for success after prison. And you know that I am going to be sharing stories of what I learned while I was in prison. But today I am filming this video on August the 13th, 2022, and it's exactly 10 years since the day my wife picked me up inside of a federal prison and drove me to a halfway house. So it's a 10-year anniversary today, and I just wanted to give a buffer to this interview that I did with Weldon Long, which you will see right now. So this is a little bit of a longer video because Weldon Long is such an extraordinary guy who I really think would have been an incredible inspiration to me while I was going through prison, and I hope he'll be an inspiration to you. It's so important for people who are living inside of jails or prisons to really understand how the decisions they are making today can influence what they can become in the weeks, months, years, and decades ahead. Our prisons really do not do a very good job of preparing people for excellence, for a pathway to success. That's what you're going to hear in Weldon's story. He went to prison the first time, and he faced some challenges, and while he was in prison, he got out, he couldn't get a job, he reverted to behavior that brought him back into prison. Then the second time that he was in prison, he had that same kind of adjustment where he wasn't focusing on how he can prepare himself, and instead he made decisions that made prison a little bit easier. And as a result, when he came back to society, again, he found real challenges in getting a job, and it didn't take long before he was facing another criminal charge, and this one exposed him to 10 years in prison. The third time that he was in prison, however, Weldon had this kind of a life-changing event, this epiphany that really caused him to rethink the values by which he was going to live. And you'll hear about it in this conversation that I have with him. Then he made a strategy that would help him get from where he was to what he wanted to become. And then he got out of prison and he went on to build a successful career, one that really inspires me as somebody who just came out of prison. And I met Weldon here in Orange County, California, several years ago, probably when I was about halfway through where I am right now. So today it's 10 years since I transitioned to a halfway house, 9 years since I finished my obligation to the Bureau of Prisons. But I want to say that just as Weldon shared with me, the decisions that we make while we're in prison, that's what he found out, have a direct influence on what our experiences are going to be like when we come home. Sadly, there are many people that come out of prison and they find enormous challenges. They find challenges in getting a job, so they spend a lot of time unemployed, or they get a job, but they're really underemployed, meaning they're not really creating opportunities to advance and make forward progress in life. Sadly, many people are finding themselves even homeless when they come out of prison. So as crazy as it may sound, the time in prison where you at least have stability, shelter and clothing and food, people get out of prison and they have a worse life because they can't even count on food, and they don't know where they're going to sleep, and they sleep under bridges or in tents or along the highway. And there's a lot of that out here in society. In fact, that really surprised me when I came back to society after 26 years of how many people really struggle to get their life back together. I don't want that to happen to anybody who's going through our course of preparing for success after prison. And that's why I feel so passionately about sharing with you the strategies that I learned from people like Weldon and that I practiced while going through 9,500 days and I found this the other day, as federal prisoner 16377-004. I don't know if you can see that with the light reflecting on it. But wherever you are right now, this isn't where you have to be in the future. Even people who you will see me interviewing people through this course, you will see me interviewing people that once had life sentences. They were told they would never get out of prison. But they're home now, and they're married, and they're leading businesses, and they're happy, and they're fulfilled. And that's why I feel so strongly about bringing this message into as many jails and prisons as I can to help people see you are making decisions today that are going to have a direct influence on how you come home. Now, all of these courses, you will find, all of the modules, all of the lessons, they really task participants with doing a few things. One, figure out how can you focus on developing stronger communication skills. And there are many types of communication skills, right? Words, I'm speaking right now, so words have meaning. Verbal skills, really important. And you'll hear Weldon talk about how those skills helped him. The second are writing skills. And that's why all of the lessons, they include an exercise in building your vocabulary and answering or responding to critical thinking questions or questions to build critical thinking skills, because we want people to know how to respond to the world in words, sentences, paragraphs. And this is the way that people can open opportunities. This is the way you can open an opportunity. Success does not come by accident. It comes by people who are willing to sow the seed so that they can prepare for success. And I don't know other people that are more qualified to tell you that story than Weldon Long, as a person who can talk about getting out of prison and failing not once, but twice, and then going back into the system with a new 10-year sentence, but completely transforming his life. And what he says is that there are lessons that he learned in preparing for success on the third time in prison that would have been really helpful to him at the start of his prison sentence. So this is, I recorded that video back in 2017, maybe even 2016. So several years ago, and I've learned a lot myself since then, and I've gone into a lot of prisons since then. And thanks to many leaders in the prison system, I've had opportunities to go to even the most secure prisons in the nation, including the ADX, the Florida the Supermax in Florence, Colorado. And these courses that you're watching go into prisons all across the nation, in jails and in prisons. So I have this platform where I get to reach people that I left behind. And I want you to know, you can't serve 26 years in prison without sensing, hey, I've left a lot of people behind, and I want to do something about going back in there and connecting with people and helping people realize, what do you have to do today to sow seeds that will prepare you for success in the weeks, months, years, and decades ahead. And it's really important to realize, once you become a justice impacted person, once somebody is a justice impacted person, complications follow, challenges follow, and they never go away. And if you continue reading through this book, Earning Freedom, you will see that I would never ask anybody to do anything that I didn't do while I was going through that journey, and that I am not still doing today. Every day I wake up early, I work hard, I try to live this deliberate, disciplined life where I'm defining success, I am creating a plan, I am building a list of priorities of what I have to do first, I am building tools, tactics, and resources that are going to help me execute on my plan, and I'm holding myself accountable every single day. I hope that you will see that in this course. I never ask you to do anything that I didn't do. I am asking you to take these efforts of preparing for success, specifically because leaders like Weldon Long and others have really inspired me to work harder, because I've been home now and I've become successful in building businesses and nurturing my relationship with my wife, Carol, who I married inside of a prison. We've been married now for 20 years, or been together now for 20 years. And every day is really a blessing. Every day feels like a blessing. I'm so grateful. And so that's why I really want you to listen to what Weldon says and I want you to listen to all of the inspiring people that we interview through this course. I will do my best to prove worthy as an ambassador of the message. And that message is, remember, to prepare for success after prison, you got to start by defining success. You got to take the next step by setting really clear goals that align with how you define success. And I'm going to challenge you to pay attention to Weldon's story right now so that you can hear how he did it. 3, you got to have the right attitude. You've got to make sure that you're making 100% commitment to success. 4, you have got to aspire to something more than what you're going through right now. See yourself as being the best in the world at what you do. 5, you've got to take incremental action steps every single day. 6, you have got to hold yourself accountable and create resources that are going to show how you're holding yourself accountable. I was looking for a book, but I don't seem to have one right here. A journal. I was really a big journaler in prison because that really helped me advance the ball. So create your accountability metrics that will demonstrate how hard you're working to prepare for success. Those accountability metrics you can use as a tool that will influence the case managers you meet in the future, the wardens you meet in the future, the people that can let you come home, your probation officer, help you build businesses, just like I did. 7, you want to make sure that you are aware, that your head is always in the game, that you understand opportunities you can seize, and understand sometimes you just have to create your own opportunities. You'll hear how Weldon did that. And then you want to continue by celebrating every achievement, as we describe in module number 9. No matter how small it is, even the fact that you're going through this course to me is a huge achievement. And I'm privileged and grateful that you're giving us your attention. And then finally, you want to celebrate. You want to show your appreciation for the blessings that have come your way by sharing this message with other people. So please pay close attention to what my friend Weldon Long has to say. He has led a pathway of struggle to success. And that's one message I want to give to every member of our community. And I really want to thank you again for being a part of the Prison Professors community. I am Michael Santos, and I believe in you. Welcome to the Earning Freedom Podcast. I am Michael Santos with michaelsantos.com and prisonprofessor.com, and I'm really excited today because I get to introduce a mastermind. And when I say that, you know that I've talked about masterminds from the people who inspired me while I was going through a struggle, but I'm also going to be telling you that there are guys out here who continue to inspire me, and one of them is also going to inspire those in my audience because he's a guy that's endured the prison system on several stages. He's going to be totally transparent, honest, talking with us about that journey. But more importantly, he came outside and, I can't swear, but crushed it. I'm talking about he didn't come back out and pursue some mediocre job. No, this is a guy who came out and built a business that's doing tens of millions of dollars a year in revenues. He's got respect from leaders in the corporate sector. He's employing people. He is exactly what every taxpayer wants to come out of the American system. And if you want to learn from a guy who's done it, rather than a guy who talks about it, you're going to want to listen to my friend Weldon Long. Weldon, welcome to the Earning Freedom Program. Thanks for being with us this morning.
Michael, I'm really happy to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. I'm a big fan of your work, and it's a real pleasure to have this opportunity to chat with you and with your audience.
Well, you are certainly what we want to see coming out of our prison system. I know that you are the type of inspiration that I would have liked to have listened to very early on in my journey, where people are telling you you've got nothing coming, that what is telling you how to survive in prison. You have experience in both going through the prison system as the system expects, but also doing something differently. And I'd love for you to tell us your story, but why don't you begin a little bit by telling us what brought you into the criminal justice system?
Well, I got into the system at a fairly young age, at 23 years old, but really it began, I would go back 7 or 8 years before that. I was a 9th grade high school dropout, really had no direction, no plan for my life, and went up through a period of about 7 or 8 years up until I was 23 years old. I wasn't involved in any criminal activity, but was, what I call a garden variety loser, really no direction, not really living according to any particular value system, just kind of, bouncing around out there. And I was raised in South Louisiana. I had moved to Denver, Colorado in 1987. And at 23 years old in 1987, given the fact the way I had lived my life, I was pretty much always in a financial bind. And as I look back on my life now, my road to prison wasn't about my financial problems. It was about my poor decisions in regard to my financial problems. And what happened in May of 1987, I didn't have the rent money and had decided to go pawn a shotgun that I had as a means to try to get rent money. I get out in the pawn shops on the east side of Denver, Colorado. Can't get enough money, for the pawn shops to pay the rent. I end up driving around the east side of Denver, pick up a guy hitchhiking. He and I smoke some cocaine. We start drinking some whiskey, and we're riding around the east side of Denver with a guy I never met with a loaded shotgun, high on cocaine. I mean, what could possibly go wrong, right? And within a matter of a couple of hours, he and I made the decision to use that shotgun to rob two innocent men at gunpoint. And that's what we did. Within a few hours after that, or about an hour, I guess, we were apprehended and were arrested on a crime of violence, armed robbery charge, attempted murder. The guy picked up hitchhiking and had taken a shot at this van that was trying to chase us. It was just a real chaotic situation. At any rate, 6 months later, I was standing in front of a state district court judge, and despite the fact I had no previous criminal record, the nature of the crime was pretty serious, so very, very serious, and he sentenced me to 10 years in the Department of Corrections. So I went down to the State Department of Corrections at 23 years old. I served about 4.5 years, and I got paroled out, and now I'm still a high school dropout. Now I'm a convicted felon to boot with no education, no training, so it will come as no shock to anybody. I didn't make it very long, less than 2 years. Went back to prison a second time on parole violations and a gun charge. Get out after about 2 years that time. Now I'm 30 years old. I'm back in the streets, two-time convicted felon, and got the only job I could find, which was in the illegal telemarketing business. Did that for a couple of years till the Fed.
Time out. That is some awesome guidance, but I gotta give some takeaways here all the way through, because a lot of the guys that we are communicating with are that same guy. Yeah. They're guys who have lived this life of struggle and hand to mouth and problems with the criminal justice system and don't know how to get out of their own way. They are people who have convictions of violence, and they're being told a message in prison that because of those bad decisions, they're destined to remain in this life. And I know the next part of your story is really going to give us that transformation. So what I really want those in our audience to be focusing on is what Weldon described in the beginning, and I can tell you what I heard, is an individual who doesn't make excuses. He didn't whine about what happened to him. He said that he made bad decisions, he used drugs, he was engaged in violence, he hung around the wrong crowd, he didn't have a plan, and he kept in this spiral. What you're going to hear now is the story of how an individual transforms his life, takes responsibility, becomes a man while locked inside of a federal prison, facing a significant amount of time, doesn't whine about it, doesn't complain about it, but takes action. That's why he's a mastermind, and that's why I'm going to ask him to continue telling us this fascinating story.
Well, and you make a great point, Michael, because I really did become a man in the penitentiary system on that third trip back, because that's what it really came down to. A man takes responsibility for his action. A man protects the people he loves. He provides for the people he loves. And I had never done that, in the early parts of my life. So after that second time out, I had a couple of years. I made it out. I did some illegal telemarketing and ended up getting an indictment on a federal case.
What does that mean?
I mean,
for our audience that doesn't know what that means, why does somebody go to prison for telemarketing and for a long period of time?
It's as simple as the fact of picking up a phone and telling someone a lie to get them to send you money on a set of lies and fabrications. Typically, it's people who are vulnerable, who are tend to be inclined to trust people, irrationally, elderly people, that type of thing. And it's a horrendous, it's a brutal crime, like all crime to some degree, I suppose. But it is a crime that really capitalizes on folks who are just not very sophisticated with respect to financial dealings. And not all of it was along those lines, but most of it was.
So my next question for those individuals who are going to come out of prison, face some challenges in the job market, they may find opportunities in telemarketing and not recognize how serious that crime is, or maybe be able to fool themselves. Walk us through a little bit about, number one, did you know what you were doing when you took the job? Was it predicated on deceit, or did you fall into it? Were you influenced by a leader in the group? How can we protect ourselves against going into a job that could lead us into more trouble?
Well, I think it was, looking back on it now at 52 years old, kind of looking back over my life, it certainly was predicated on deceit, from the get-go. But you make an interesting point, because a lot of times guys can rationalize it because it's the only work they can get. The reality is that if it's not true, if it's based on some promise that doesn't really exist, it is going to fall under the rubric of an illegal telemarketing activity. It's easy to rationalize, and of course I did it. The guys I worked with, we all rationalized it, But the truth of the matter is, if you don't feel right about it, I'll give you a perfect example. When I got out the last time, I don't want to go too far ahead because I want to double back. I know that you want to get those points in. But when I got out the last time, I went to work for, not to work, but I interviewed at this place that was selling oil wells, an investment in oil wells. And when I walked in, before they said a word, I got a vibe. And after about a 5-minute conversation with the sales manager, he mentioned the fact that every now and then they have an issue with attorneys general here and there. And right away, it's like, okay, that's all I need to know. And I was done and walked out of the interview. So a guy knows, right? A guy like you, a guy like me knows. When you've been there, you understand, when there's a bad situation.
Yeah, and but it's really important for you to talk. I'm really grateful to you for being honest with our audience, because I really want to help people understand that before they get out, that it's really important to associate yourself with honorable people of integrity, make good decisions every single day, and recognize just because you're not holding a gun or trafficking in drugs, that doesn't mean that you cannot be targeted for prosecution and serve a significant amount of time in prison. Right now, we have a movement going after white-collar crime, and anybody who has a criminal background really needs to come out and say, I'm going to be transparent, I'm going to understand I'm under the microscope, but I'm going to make it nevertheless. And that's what you did. Tell us about the rest of your journey.
Well, on that third time back in prison in 1996, I was 32 years old. I was back in prison on the federal charges, and had become kind of the personification of the three-time loser. The operative word there, loser, because that's exactly what I was. And at 32 years old, I had to start about a 4.5-year federal prison sentence, and I was going back to the state system on some of those old charges that were still hanging out there. But I was going to go back for 7 years. And on June 10th of 1996, I was sitting at a federal detention center out in Las Vegas, Nevada, on the federal case. And one of the cops walks in the cell house, and he tells me to call home. So I call home, and I find out that unexpectedly my father had passed away at 59 years old. And the reality, Michael, that the realization, I guess, that my father went to his grave with me in prison again, and knowing that my father went to his grave, knowing me as a thief and a crook and a punk and a liar, it was devastating to me. And I always had it in my mind that I was going to somehow get my life together. I don't know if I thought I was going to win the lottery or, something magical was going to happen, but somehow my life would just come together and I could be a man that I was proud of. And the realization that my father went to his grave knowing me as this guy, it was devastating to me. I remember the very last time I talked to my father, it was a couple of weeks before he passed away. And the Sunday afternoon, I called him from the detention center there. And my dad always did. He took my collect calls and, was always trying to encourage me in whatever way he could. And we're having this conversation, and I'm belly aching about my life, and I'm belly aching about the prosecutors and the ex-wife and this and that and the other. And at one point in the conversation, my dad says to me, he says, son, he said, your life could be worse. And I said, Dad, how the hell can my life be any worse? I'm a 9th grade high school dropout. I'm 32 years old. I've never had a job, never had a career. I'm a 3-time convicted felon. The only thing I had managed to accomplish in my life is that in my previous trip out on parole, I had fathered a son. So now I had a small son out there that I had completely abandoned my own flesh and blood. And my dad's telling me, well, son, things could be worse. I said, Dad, how could my life be any worse? I've abandoned my own son. I'm going to be 40 years old when I get out of prison this time. My dad says to me the words that changed my life. He says to me, he said, son, you're still breathing. And as long as you're breathing, you have a chance to change your life. And the operative word there was you and your life, right? Nobody's going to do it for me. And not realizing the significance of what my father said, we exchanged our I love yous. I hung up the phone, and I never spoke to my father again. That was the last thing he ever said to me. 2 weeks later, he was gone. And when he was gone, the reality of what I had done to my life, the reality of who I was in my father's eyes, the scales came off, if you will, the justifications went away. And at 32 years old, starting another 7-year sentence, I realized I had completely destroyed my life, that I had destroyed my life. and that my life was, we can get into the philosophies that I kind of developed over those years, but really was about realizing that I had done this to myself, and that if it is to be, it's up to me, and it was a bitter pill to swallow, because I was a guy that had lived his life in such an irresponsible fashion. Hell, it was everybody's fault but mine, right? And that 180-degree turn, which for me was the turning point of understanding that, hey, I created this life for myself, and the only shot I got at get it better is fixing it myself.
Well, you certainly have done that, and I know that you've pursued some very clear, direct goals while you were in there on that last bit. Tell us a little bit about what those goals that you set and how you achieved them.
Yeah. Well, as I began to read and study and kind of understood this concept, and that was kind of being encapsulated in Emerson's quote that we become what we think about all day long. And I started reading a lot about how our thoughts, kind of manifest themselves in their lives. And I remember reading Friedrich Nietzsche, and Nietzsche wrote that we attract that which we feared. And I thought, well, why would I attract something that I feared? And then I started thinking about my life, and what did I fear most? I feared never knowing my son, living and dying in the joint, never having a job, never being a success. And what had I attracted? My life was a perfect reflection of what was in there, all the chaos, all the insanity. And so it occurred to me that I needed to change what was going on in here in terms of my mindset. So I sat down at the little metal desk in my cell, and I wrote out on a sheet of paper what a perfect life for me would look like. I'm an awesome father to my son. I'm wealthy beyond my wildest dreams. I'm a man of honor, character, and integrity. I have a beautiful, amazing wife. None of these things I had, of course, all of the things that I wanted. And I wrote that list out, and as I'm sure many of your listeners and viewers will understand and can relate to, I took some toothpaste and put it on the back of that sheet of paper and stuck it to the wall of my cell. And for the next 7 years, I would visualize all these amazing things, writing books and building companies and having a great family and living a life of honor and integrity. And what I didn't realize then, of course, at that stage of my, kind of process, is that I was, changing the neurology, the neural connectors in my brain, that these new thoughts, I became so obsessed with them. They were so overpowering and they were so all-consuming that they literally changed the things that I habitually thought about. And little by little by little, as I often say, I changed my thoughts, which changed my emotions changed my actions changed my results. And over the next 7 years, and this was before I even got out, I built a very fulfilling life before I ever walked out of the joint the last time. In fact, people ask me sometimes, and this will seem kind of, kind of strange to you, because I know you've done a significant, quarter of a century of in behind the walls and starting at a very early age. But when people hear that kind of thing, is I'm sure you're like, how in the world did you do it? How'd you do those years? And I tell people, you know what? The first 6.5 years I did were miserable, because I was a punk and I was fighting and I was resisting and I was struggling. When I began to understand I was responsible, that I could change it, honestly, they were 7 of the most productive years of my life. And it's crazy to say, but the reality is I accomplished more emotionally, spiritually, and mentally than I ever had in my life. And it began to change. I got a GED. I was able to get enrolled in some online correspondence types courses. I worked on a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and 7 years later, I walked out with a whole different mindset. I was released to a half.
You earned it. You earned your GED, you earned a bachelor's degree, and you earned a master's degree, but it wasn't just a piece of paper as you're describing, as our listeners should be absorbing. You actually did the work. You quote Nietzsche, you quote Emerson, you learned this type of mental development that you have since been able to capitalize upon in building your great business and getting people out here to pay you to speak. So the seeds for your success began inside of that prison cell, just as can happen for every listener of the Earning Freedom program. This is what success looks like. You hear him talking about writing out his goals on a piece of paper. You hear him talking about identifying values, reflecting on what does success look like, and then what? It's visualized first, set the plan second, execute the plan. As those days turn into weeks, those weeks turn into months, those months turn into years. You replace the excuses with action, and then you become the success that Weldon Long is going to talk with us about right now.
Yeah, so I ended up getting out the last time in January of 2003. By that point, I'm almost 40 years old, but I had a new mindset. And, the difficult challenge that I faced, as many of your listeners will relate to, is the difficulty of finding work. And it's one of the biggest gaps in terms of public policy in society. I know you do a lot of work in that arena in terms of figuring out this problem. It's going to be figuring out how do we provide gainful employment for folks coming out of the penitentiary system. I knew it'd be a challenge. I had the kind of the combination of not just being a convicted felon, but really at 40 years old, not having any work experience or practical skills, But I got out there, and for 6 months, while I was in the halfway house, I would knock on doors. And I'm telling you, I would get 20 or 30 no's a day. I would knock on every door I could trying to find a job. And finally, after 6 months, I walked into a little heating and air conditioning company. And the guy asked me if I could sell air conditioners. I said, well, I'll die trying, And I got that opportunity. I knew right away that I wouldn't have a plan B. I wasn't going to have another option. I couldn't say, well, if I don't like this job, I'll go over here and try to find another one. Guy in my situation with no experience and the felony record, et cetera, I was very fortunate to get that job. And so I decided I was going to make the most. I was going to become the best air conditioning salesman the world had ever seen. And I don't know if I'm the best in the world, but I got really, really good at it. And I went out, I'll never forget this. My very first month, the guy hired me. I went out, I didn't know anything about air conditioning. I watched how they put a system in, and I started running sales leads for him. And the first month I went out and I sold $149,000 of air conditioners. My very first month in July of 2003, I made over $12,000 in sales commissions. And I decided I was never going to second guess the heating and air conditioning industry in my life. That industry was my segue into a life of real wealth and prosperity and meaningful work. I worked there for about a year. I went on to open my own company about a year later. I grew that company from $0 to $20 million in 5 years. In fact, in 2009, that company was selected by Inc. magazine as one of the fastest growing small companies in America. I sold that company in 2010 and then kind of went full-time into the speaking, the training, the writing, and that kind of thing. And the irony is, Michael, and you kind of alluded to it a moment ago, the people that pay me today, I've developed a lot of programs and teachings around my story. My story is kind of the backbone of our entire company. But it's so crazy because the people that pay me today to hear my story are the same people that wouldn't have paid me, minimum wage to sweep their shop floors 10 or 12 years ago. That's the irony. And it illustrates the degree to which we can come full circle. Tomorrow, I'm doing a full day event for Federal Express, a Fortune 50 company, $50 billion in revenue. And they're paying me to come in and teach their people how to create the right mindset and the sales process. It's amazing. Could you imagine me trying to get a job at FedEx 12 years ago? I mean, it'd be a joke. But what I hope that your listeners take away, and I know you do so much work in this field, but from my conversation with your listeners, with your viewers, I hope they understand that the degree to which we can come full circle is staggering. And sometimes it's hard to remember that because it's easy to get beat down. It's easy to start buying into the negative hype that you're a convict, you're going to have struggle, you're not going to have this, and we can buy into that real easy. And oftentimes I did it for years, and guys, as you know, we got to maintain hope, and they got to understand that no matter how far away it feels they are from their dream and from getting things in the track they want, it's not as far as it seems. Success is so much closer than we think if we can leverage a few simple principles, the principles you teach, the things you're talking about today. It's simple things, but they can have transformational results.
Well, I would love to say that those were my principles and my ideas, but the reality is I stole them from masterminds just like you. Many of the people that you quote were also hugely influential to me through the 26 years that I served, and they've made all the difference. I still live by them now as I'm working to build my business and emulate your success out here. Perhaps you could tell our audience a little bit right now about what you'd mentioned being in the heating and air conditioning business, commission-based sales, really crushing it, building a high-volume business. But now you indicate that you are in the business of selling information. Yeah. Why don't you tell our audience a little bit about how that business model works? Because I know that there's a lot of guys inside that have amazing stories, and I know they would like to do the same type of thing. They may not build a $20 million business, but they may want to speak with inner city kids. They may want to speak with substance abuse issues. What advice might you offer to individuals who want to pursue that path?
I think what it starts with is what you just mentioned is, you got to have a story, and you have to have the credibility to tell that story, much in the way that you do. If you've got the credibility that you've done something, and if it's a guy that's recovered from substance abuse, or, your situation with going in the penitentiary at such an early age for, 2.5 decades, and to come out as the person you are today, the very dynamic, energetic, focused, awesome person, then that's credibility. I can't argue with you if you're telling me something that you personally experienced. So what I did is, after I was in the heating and air conditioning industry those first 5 years and sold my company, we sold a brand of equipment, an air conditioning line of equipment called Carrier and Bryant. And that's one of the huge manufacturers. And we were just one of their thousands of dealers across the country. But once we had the success that we had, I went back to them. And I said, by the way, you may have noticed this little company out in Colorado has been growing leaps and bounds. And we're like, yeah, we wonder what was going on out there. What are you doing? I said, well, I've developed a very systematic, step-by-step residential sales process. In other words, a specific set of tools to have a conversation with a homeowner across the kitchen table. And so we did a little pilot program for them. And that pilot program turned into a national program. And so that was kind of the initial part of it. I developed a 2-day training program, and they began to pay me to go out and train their other companies to have the same success that we did. By the way, while I was doing that, I was taking every speaking gig I could get my hands on. And of course, at no fees, right? But like the Rotary Club, you call a Rotary Club, you call a Kiwanis Club, they're always looking for speakers for their luncheons. I started doing all that kind of stuff. And my main purpose of that was to refine telling my stories. Public speaking, as you know, is all about having stories. And you make a point, you tell a story. You make a point, you tell them a story. That's what people, can keep interested in. So I started taking every speaking opportunity I could. And no matter what the venue was, I remember one time going to my chiropractor. He did this holistic health group once a month. And he asked me if I would come in and speak to his group. Well, I come in there. It's in the evening after hours. It's maybe 3 or 4 people, all of whom are in their 60s or 70s. And I laid down my prosperity mindset training, and told my story and refined the craft of storytelling. And little by little, the air conditioning training turned into other opportunities. People would see me speak, and I'd get invited to speak at this convention as a keynote speaker, that type of thing. And it really grew organically, and just getting really good at telling the story. The other part of that is it can't be just the story. It's got to be a story, and then here's the point of it. So I would recommend to those in your network that are looking to develop a speaking career, a training career, that type of thing, there's got to be a specific takeaway. It can't be just a feel-good story. The feel-good story is important. But, for example, when I'm with FedEx tomorrow, I'll tell my story, and that gets them believing, wow, anything's possible. I thought my divorce was holding me back. I thought that bankruptcy 10 years ago was killing me, right? This guy has overcome, 25 years of insanity. And so you kind of get the credibility there. And then I take them through, as I write about in The Power of Consistency, the fear process, which is just a goal-setting process, affirmations, review, the things you were talking about earlier. And then we go into a specific sales process. I've developed a very simple 4-step sales process that can really be translated into any industry. And I teach them that process. And so there's got to be some substance, a model of some sort. I'm looking at you right now, behind you, prison professor. I know what that means, right? You're building a brand. And so that's really important too, to have a brand, to have a message, and, and having a brand promise. I'm looking at yours right now, your guide to, beyond, prepare and beyond prison and beyond. So, I mean, it's what you're doing. It's what I do every day. It's what a lot of guys in our business are doing. And it's a great opportunity. I spoke just 2 weeks ago. I was gave the commencement address at a high school up in Denver. It was 5,000 or 6,000, 7,000 people there, in this big arena. And there's always opportunities like that for people with a story of overcoming adversity.
Well, what it's really about, Weldon, is having your actions speak louder than your words. You spoke about having a story, but it is absolutely essential, as you said, and I hope that our audience members really take that away, is they've got to be able to document why their actions reflect who they are, not just the happy talk. Don't be the type of guy who's just full of happy talk. Be the guy who says, this is what I'm going to do the type of work that is necessary, build a plan, Figure out some type of way to bring value to your customer and never give up. It requires that level of commitment, that 100% commitment that nobody can take away. And people can look at you and all of a sudden they don't care about your past. They care about how you can bring value to their lives and their organization. And when you've done that, ban the box doesn't matter. Your felony background doesn't matter. All that matters is that you can bring the juice. And you got to bring that juice every single day, not only in your business, but in your personal character, in your personal life. That's what Weldon Long teaches, and that's why he's phenomenally successful. Somebody I consider a mastermind, somebody I look forward to emulating his success, just as I suspect all of you do. Weldon, what is the price point? And I don't want to give away your trade secrets, but if you can give some level of bullet points. We know that your first business did about 20 mil. This type of business, what is the price point that you look at the high end, the Stephen Coveys, the Anthony Robbins, both of people I think that you have worked with those individuals. Yep. What is the range of price points that people can anticipate building a business in that arena for information type products?
Well, you mentioned two of the biggest in the business. And ironically, Dr. Covey, I was just reminded of one of his quotes when you were talking about you just got to do it. Dr. Covey used to often say, you cannot talk yourself out of a situation that you walked yourself into. So it has to be that case of doing it. Those two. Let's talk about those two in particular, and then talk about some realistic objectives. I think for many of your fans, your listeners. If you look at Stephen Covey's company, for example, they have probably been the master of leveraging content, because it is hard to sell knowledge. It's the most difficult thing to sell. And what they do is they, certify people to teach their content, and they provide all the materials, all the work stuff. In fact, I happen to teach a program under a licensing agreement with them called the 7 Habits of Highly Effective HVAC Professionals. And it's a licensing agreement to teach that content in that industry. Franklin Covey, sells $200 million a year of materials. They're basically in the publishing business. So that's kind of like, the ultimate success in this industry. You take a Tony Robbins, you mentioned Tony, and just for clarification, I haven't actually worked with Tony. He did endorse my first book, and I've had an online relationship with him, for lack of a better term, just in communications. But his company, they have a lot of different products, a lot of different ways they leverage it, but they generate, anywhere in the range of $30 to $40 million a year. Of course, he does these huge live events. I could tell you that those are the household name cases, right? And outside of people in my industry, most people wouldn't have heard of me, but you can still build a business to the tune of millions and millions of dollars. In terms of how we sell our content, I will tell you that our budget next year is for 2017 is in the $5 to $10 million range. And we've been able to do that through a couple of different avenues. Number one, it's got to be scalable. That's the hardest part about doing what we do. When you get paid for what you say, you're limited by how many times you can say it, right? If it's live, if you're always in front of a group. And even if you get a great fee, we have keynote fees, typically run around $12,000 or $15,000 for a keynote, maybe to the tune of about $25,000 for multiple day events. But the reality is you can only do so many of those in a particular time, right? So the key is leverage. How do you leverage that? Well, it's kind of what you're doing. You're taking your content, you're leveraging it and duplicating it, selling it in larger quantities. So what we've done is, for the HVAC industry specifically, as an example, we've developed a comprehensive training program for people in that HVAC industry, because I've got a lot of experience in that business. And we have companies that subscribe on a monthly basis to get access to our training. I do new weekly trainings, kind of like you're doing there in your studio right now. We've got a studio like that here in the building. It's all green screen, so we shoot video. It looks like ESPN or something. It's amazing, the technology, but it's all green screen. And so each week I produce new content. So subscribers to our programs, they get the core training they can use to train their people, and we have testing set up for them, and they can take exams and test for comprehension, and then we do weekly stuff. So that's one way we have subscribers, hundreds of companies that pay on a subscription basis. We actually just signed two new contracts with huge manufacturers to launch customized programs for them in the fall. So there are thousands of dealers will come into our program as well. The other way is the keynote speaking. There is such a high demand for fresh, powerful content. Your story is a perfect example. My story is a perfect example. Guys who have overcome a lot of adversity, and the keynote speaking can be anywhere from 5,000, or it might be 2,000 getting started. It might be, hey, I did a ton of free speaking, right? And then I got my keynote fee to a couple of thousand. And then you get a couple of referrals, you start raising that fee. But even a non-celebrity speaker, if a celebrity speaker, can get anywhere from $25,000 to $50,000. We've seen stuff all over the news where Hillary and Bill Clinton, maybe $100,000, but that's the 0.1% that come in those kind of fees. They have to be, virtually world famous. But an average good speaker can go out there and charge $10,000 to $15,000 for a good, exciting, motivational keynote with a point for a convention. Again, I'm looking at the picture of you behind you there in front of thousands of people. There's only a select few that have the ability to engage a crowd at that level. And if you can do that, there's a lot of demand for those services.
Well, you are incredibly inspiring to us, Weldon. I am going to ask you, we've come to the end of this episode right now. I'm kind of budgeted about 30 minutes for each one of these, but I am going to build this distribution network. And when I do, I am going to try and impose upon your goodwill again and see if we can't develop a course that would show people exactly how to do it. And Weldon is an in-demand speaker. He is a commercial success, and I'm not going to ask him to do that for free, but we're going to create a program that we can monetize because we are what we're asking you to do. If we were just giving everything away, we wouldn't be for real because you can't eat on just goodwill. We give away a lot of goodwill, but we also bring enormous value. And I can tell you, if Weldon can share his secret to success for you, you got to ask yourself the question, is it worth it to sacrifice a couple of those ice creams or sacrifice a couple of those Tiffy products and get the Weldon Long secret sauce? I can tell you I would pay for it, and I'm sure that many of those in our audience would as well. Weldon, I'm going to give you the last word for the Earning Freedom program today. Is there anything you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Well, yeah, really there is. And first of all, I just want to thank you for the work that you're doing. I kept up with your work before you got out and reading your blogs and reading the work that you were doing. And I know that you're, a published author a couple of times over. And I just think that it's really, really great that guys like me and guys like you can get out. And you got to have your commercial success because you got to pay the rent, right? But at the same time, to reach back into the penitentiaries. I know you're in and out of the penitentiaries in a good way, at this point in your career. And I'm the same way. I do a lot of work inside the penitentiary. So the first thing I want to say is to thank you for the work that you're doing. The second thing I want to say is to reach out to our brothers that are still behind the walls. And that is, you got to believe. You have to believe. You have to have hope that it's not too late. Listen, there's nobody who was a bigger knucklehead than me that just struggles just desperately flailing about for 2.5 decades trying to figure out how to put a decent life together. And I don't know why it is. There's a lot of reasons, societally and environmentally, I don't know, but certain guys get off in a rut. And you can, get off in it like I did and just pound your head against the walls for many, many years. You could be a guy like you that steps off one time and bam, that's, it could be a very unforgiving system. As you learn, and as I'm sure your listeners know, it's easy to get in. It can be hard to get out, especially when you get caught up in some of the federal, drug penalties and things because they can be so severe. But I would just tell them to have hope, to not surrender, to not give up, to stay focused, to never surrender, to believe that success is closer than they believe, to get serious about writing out their goals. As you mentioned, it's something I did. It's something I'm sure that you do, to write out those specific dreams. Be willing to sacrifice something. It may be, having to disengage from certain factions in the penitentiary. At some point, you gotta stand for you, what you believe in, and what you know is right to try to create a bigger and brighter future for yourself and for your family. And so if there's anything I could say to your listeners, man, it's just keep the hope. I'm the least likely guy to have the kind of success I've had. I've had my IQ tested 3 times, Michael. Every time I went to the state penitentiary, they tested it, right? I tested out about 103. I'm not a product of brilliance. I'm not a product of some Ivy League degree. I'm a product of hard work, focus, and simplicity. And if guys can just stay focused on that, keep that hope alive, and read Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl. Mm-hmm. That book will help anybody who's going through a bad time.
I would say that you are the most likely, and you are exactly where you are supposed to be a successful guy, because you are the living, breathing proof that an individual who lives for the future and can move beyond the past, takes incremental action steps, doesn't make excuses, that individual can climb to the top
We see it in Weldon Long, and we can see it in anybody else who makes that same level of 100% commitment. Weldon, thank you very, very much for spending this time for us. I know your time is incredibly valuable, and everybody who's listening to the Earning Freedom Program is incredibly grateful to you. We hope to have you back. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael.